Adolf Hitler started off as an ordinary artist, but he eventually climbed to power and became Germany's dictator and the architect of the Holocaust. Given the devastation left in Hitler's wake, a major question for historians of the 20th century has been how Hitler captured the German imagination and came to power. It'll surprise many, and some won't even believe, but every stage of Hitler's ascent to power was democratically and legally. Born in Austria, but loyal to the Weimar Republic, Hitler served for 4 years in the German army during World War I. In 1918, a month before Germany officially surrendered on November 10th, he was blinded and left momentarily mute by a mustard gas assault. Hitler's outrage over Germany's loss and the Treaty of Versailles, which placed blame for World War I on Germany, inspired him to pursue a life in politics, and also as a spy by the army because of influenced personality. After being tasked in June 1919 by the German army with gathering intelligence on the German Workers' Party, also known as the DAP, Adolf Hitler eventually became a member of that organization in September 1919. He respected the party's opposition to the new Weimar Republic, the Treaty of Versailles, and treated Jews in Germany the same as everyone else. Hitler rose to prominence within the party quite quickly and became one of its most renowned speakers. On February 24, 1920, Hitler presided over a political gathering that had almost 2,000 attendees to announce the Nationalist 25-point program, or the National Socialist Program. He also officially renamed the party the Nationalsozialistische Deutsche Arbeiterpartei, which translates to the National Socialist German Workers' Party, NSDAP, or for short, Nazi Party. Hitler started giving speeches at Munich beer halls to contact and recruit more people. All of Bavaria knew of him thanks to his excellent eloquence and propaganda. His persuasive speaking and propaganda skills made sure his name was known throughout all of Bavaria. Concerned about the potential of the Worker' Party combining with the German Socialist Party, Hitler made a threat to resign from the party. So they decided not to unite with the opposition party and instead appointed Hitler party chairman, since he was the most well-known and influential man at the time. Under his leadership, the NSDAP was used as a brutal fighting force against other German political organizations. Hitler formed the Assault Division, which became known as the Sturmabteilung or the Brown Shirts. In 1922, Adolf Hitler founded 3 of his most important organizations: the Hitler Youth, the Jungenbund der NSDA, aka the Hitler Youth, and the Staff Guard, or for short, the SS. At party rallies, he maintained his narrative of hatred for Jews and support for the triumph of the Aryan race. Hitler praised Benito Mussolini's fascist coup in Italy that October. Munich served as the location for the inaugural Reichsparteitag, often known as the Nuremberg Rally, which took place in January 1923. In the latter part of the year, in November 1923, Hitler attempted his own coup during the beer hall putsch, with 2,000 Nazis marching on the city center. It failed with 18 deaths, including 16 Nazis and 4 police officers. Hitler was eventually apprehended for high treason 2 days later, but instead of rejection, his name rose to the national level. During the trial in 1924, Hitler was found guilty and was thrown into jail for 5 years. During his time in jail, he wrote Mein Kampf, which roughly translates to My Struggle, which was a manifesto of Nazi propaganda and anti-Semitism. Even though the Nazi Party was outlawed in Bavaria after the beer hall putsch, it was successful in winning a few seats in the German federal elections in May and December. And after completing barely 9 months of his term, Hitler was freed from prison. The beer hall putsch's failure and Mussolini's influence led Hitler to pursue democratic options of taking power. After the publication of Mein Kampf in July 1925, Hitler became a household name among European fascists. Hitler created the SS independently of the SA. In 1924, he also legally discarded his Austrian citizenship. But Paul von Hindenburg won the election and became the president of Germany. But still, a good thing happened for Hitler. Joseph Goebbels, a popular politician at the time, joined the Nazi Party after reading Mein Kampf. Outside of Bavaria and across Germany, Hitler and the Nazi Party were making strides toward gaining public acceptance. As the mid-1920s progressed, the party entered mainstream politics with the help of anti-Semitic propaganda. They were successful in winning votes and seats in every election for the federal government. The Nazi Party did better in federal elections than it had in the past, although they still only garnered 2.6% of the vote in 1928. By year's end, however, the Nazi Party had grown to almost 130,000 members. Erich Ludendorff, the Nazi Party's presidential candidate, received 1.1% of the vote in a run for office. On October 29, 1929, there was a catastrophic meltdown on the New York Stock Exchange that sent shockwaves across the global financial system and in German politics. Many Germans found themselves out of work and struggling financially. A month later, Germans went to the polls for a referendum. It rejected the terms of the Treaty of Versailles and forbade government officials in Germany from making payments on the country's World War I obligations. Despite the referendum's failure, the Nazi Party gained significant credibility and patriotic sympathy. Street violence caused by the Nazis and fueled by Goebbels' propaganda increased in 1930. The Nazi Party secured 107 seats in the federal election that took place in September. The results of the election virtually shut down the more moderate parties in Germany, including the Communists. The Nazis had grown to become Germany's biggest opposition party. By invoking Article 48 of the German Constitution, the Chancellor of Germany at the time, Heinrich Brüning, aimed to ease the financial strain that was being placed on Germany. Because of this, the president was able to pass policies without the approval of parliament. To oppose Chancellor Brüning's liberal policies, Hitler joined the conservative Harzburg Front. It was an anti-democratic attempt to establish a unified front against Germany's moderate government. The Nazis, on the other hand, had no interest in working with anybody else because they wanted Hitler to have absolute power. There were now more than 800,000 people in the Nazi Party. In the presidential election held in March 1932, Hitler lost to President Hindenburg despite receiving more than 36% of the vote. To counter Hitler's rise to power, President Hindenburg replaced Chancellor Brüning with Franz von Papen in May. In July of 1932, the Nazis received almost 37% of the public vote. As the biggest party in the Reichstag, they elected Hermann Göring as president. Hitler had previously requested the office of the Chancellor and had rejected Chancellor Papen's offer of vice-chancellor. While the Nazis' vote share dropped on November, 19 influential representatives of Germany's business community nonetheless signed the Industriellen-Eingabe, calling on President Hindenburg to appoint Hitler chancellor. But Major General Kurt von Schleicher, an adversary of Hitler's, succeeded Chancellor Papen in December. With Hitler's help, Papen convinced Hindenburg to appoint Hitler chancellor in exchange for Hitler naming him his vice-chancellor. By 1933, Hitler and the Nazi Party would benefit from the political maneuverings he had undertaken before. Hitler's rise to power coincided with the Great Depression, and millions of unemployed Germans clung to his promises of economic recovery. With Papen's help and Hindenburg's approval, Hitler became chancellor in January 1933, marking the beginning of his seizure of power. Fear was sparked not just in the democracies that are the region's neighbors, but also among the Jewish community when his nomination was announced. A few years later, Hitler would lead Germany into World War II, which would be the final test of his authority, as well as the might of mankind itself. In March of 1933, as a result of the Enabling Act, Hitler was granted plenary powers. These powers allowed him to act without being constrained by the parliament or the German constitution. Hitler used these powers to set up the Third Reich. When Adolf Hitler attained a position of dictatorship, one of his first acts was to remove civil rights and possibilities for resistance. In July, it became illegal to hold or participate in political parties that were not Nazi parties. 3 months later, Germany announced that it would no longer participate in the League of Nations or the World Disarmament Conference. During the Night of the Long Knives, Hitler gave orders to the SS to execute a number of political rivals and opponents, including the execution of leaders of the SA who were opposing Hitler's control. As Hitler had plenary powers, he was able to order the executions even if the courts did not provide their approval. Between the 30th of June and the 2nd of July of 1934, there were over 150 executions, and hundreds more were detained. Because of Hitler's actions, Vice-Chancellor Papen stepped down from his position on July 3rd. A month after that, President Hindenburg passed away. The day before his death, the cabinet approved a bill to do away with the position of president, and all of the president's responsibilities were given to Chancellor Adolf Hitler. Thus, Hitler was elevated to the position of Führer und Reichskanzler and became dictator of Germany. Soldiers in the German army were required to take the Hitler Oath, in which they pledged their devotion and obedience not to the state, but to Hitler. As Führer, he proceeded to cut off political and economic ties between Germany and the rest of the world. He violated the terms of the Treaty of Versailles by arming Germany again, and in 1938, he started expanding Germany's frontiers by annexing Austria. By the time 1941 had rolled around, Hitler's army had already invaded the Sudetenland, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Denmark, Norway, Belgium, the Netherlands, Luxembourg, France, Yugoslavia, and Greece. All of these countries belong to the European continent. Along with Japan's assault on the United States, his siege of Britain and the Soviet Union dragged almost every country in the world into the conflict in some way to start World War II. Over 40,000 concentration camps and slums were built by Nazi Germany under Hitler's instruction to confine, enslave, and kill people. Jews from Germany and other invaded nations made up most of these captives, along with political opponents, homosexuals, Romani, and other nationalities from throughout the world. In the end, Hitler's desire for power was responsible for the deaths of 75 million people before he committed suicide in 1945. The results of Adolf Hitler's rule were catastrophic and devastating to every community in the world. But if you look at his rise, he would never have been able to rise without the support of his followers and political friends. The 20 years leading up to World War II are a historical example that highlights the dangers that might arise if fascism is allowed to make inroads into democracies. September 1st will mark 83 years since Germany invaded Poland, starting World War II, and historians still debate what caused the German people to follow the Nazis into the conquest and the horrors. World War I's centennial has only just passed, and many consider that the conclusion of the war and the demands of the peace deal led directly to Nazism and World War II. Is it that easy to connect the dots? There is a link, particularly because Germans Nazis and non-Nazis alike really thought that Germany was fighting for its independence, if not for its very survival. But Hitler was very clear. World War II was not about former German territory assigned to Poland or about the national self-determination of Germans living outside Germany. The war was fought to set up a new racial order in which Germans were superiors and Slavs were inferiors and Jews had no place. It was a matter of building an empire in which the righteous could rule. In terms of foreign policy and morals, the Nazis weren't your typical German nationalists. They were outright revolutionaries. So, knowing what Nazis had in mind, why did people follow Hitler's regime? Most Germans didn't expect their country to lose World War I, and when people found out that its leaders had given up, they felt shocked and betrayed. The Emperor of Germany, Kaiser Wilhelm II, stepped down from the monarchy and fled to the Netherlands. As revolutionaries fought for the control of the German capital of Berlin, a new government formed in a smaller city to the south called Weimar. Almost overnight, Germany turned into a democratic nation, which would be called the Weimar Republic. The fall of the monarchy sparked a power struggle and a rush to fill the void. There were a lot of disillusioned young people who returned to German and Austrian society after the First World War, which was billed as the war to end all wars, since their formative years were spent there. So, they brought this fighting spirit back to the streets of Germany and the political culture of Germany. Beer halls and street brawls were commonplace for German politics. For a liberal society to work and for a democracy to work, there had to be compromises. There had to be courtesy. And the start of democracy in Germany had nothing to do with it. Adolf Hitler was one of the new generation of German democratic experimenters who brought a combative spirit back to the experiment. Hitler was an Austrian citizen who had volunteered to fight for the German army. And like hundreds of thousands of other Germans in 1919, some of whom were in the army, some of whom were not, Hitler was troubled by the nation's loss and deeply disturbed by the political revolutions that happened at the same time and was looking for answers. And he found them in a political organization that already existed called the German Workers' Party. And because of his gift for public speaking, he quickly rose to fame in the movement. Early on in the year 1920, the party went through a name change, being known from that point on as the National Socialist German Workers' Party, or the Nazi Party for short. It was a movement that offered Hitler an explanation for Germany's defeat, namely that the nation had been sold out. That it was not his fault as a former soldier that Germany had lost, but rather seditious forces at home had undercut the war effort. For boiling blood youth, that made sense of why Germany had lost. It ended up being the most important part of Hitler's discourses. And then, attached to that, was a particular statement that among those seditious forces were the Jews. Traitors have betrayed us, that's why we lost the war. You need a scapegoat for that. The Jews were a scapegoat. And Hitler carried that notion all over the nation. This was the start of Hitler laying the blame for his disgrace on his rivals in the political sphere. And then, from 1918 until 1923, Weimar was racked by a period of instability that saw hyperinflation at its height. During the Great Inflation of 1923, a loaf of bread cost thousands of marks, which meant that it was elusive for most people. It was a waste of time to go to work, since the worth of your money perished every hour of every day. That's when things went downhill. Hitler's effort to grab power in November 1923 during the height of hyperinflation was no accident. This offered him a perfect opportunity. That Weimar had gotten so chaotic, the downward spiral had gone so far, that the beer hall putsch became inevitable. Hitler and about 2,000 of his supporters tried to take over Munich by staging a coup. It ended in a fight that claimed the lives of 16 Nazis and 4 German police officers. 2 days after that, Hitler was arrested and charged with treason. The coup attempt was a failure. He then was sentenced to jail. Instead of being treated harshly or being imprisoned for lengthy periods, he was treated like a celebrity in prison. In prison, Hitler penned his master plan, Mein Kampf, translated as My Struggle. During his time in jail, Hitler made a point how successful propaganda can be, and he used that knowledge to win over the German people when he was released. Protests were organized to instill patriotism among Germans, and he founded a daily newspaper in 1925 with the help of the notorious Joseph Goebbels. It was a good time to be the Weimar Republic in the mid-1920s. Both the unemployment and inflation rates dropped. There was a sense that Germans would be able to go on with a degree of stability and prosperity. But then followed the stock market collapse of 1929, and that was the beginning of the economic disaster. Germany was in a gloomy atmosphere from 1930 to 1933. The country was hit hard by the worldwide economic depression, and millions of people were out of work. As the jobless grew in number, so did the millions of others who saw the depression as a direct effect of Germany's humiliation in World War I. Many Germans thought that the coalition government was weak and couldn't fix the economic crisis. Widespread discontent with the government's handling of the financial crisis, as well as a sense of impending doom and rage at the government's seeming incompetence, offered breeding soil for Hitler's final rise. For Hitler, the master speech giver, the long-awaited opportunity to let loose his talents on the German people had arrived. These downtrodden masses would make a sympathetic audience for him. Throughout his speeches, Adolf Hitler gave the German people the comfort they needed most. He made them a ton of hazy promises while skirting the specifics of the situation. He would use the catchphrases that were easy to remember and then repeat them often. His campaign appearances were carefully staged. Audiences were always kept waiting, deliberately letting the tension increase, only to be broken by solemn processions of brown shirts with gold banners, blaring military music, and finally the appearance of Hitler amid shouts of Heil in a small, dark room with theatrical lighting and swastika decor. The effect was overpowering and very eye-catching. Hitler was a strong and captivating speaker who got a lot of people to follow and vote for him by arousing their anger and feeling of helplessness, which made a lot of Germans who wanted change to join his cause. The Nazis swore to lift Germany out of the Great Depression with their election campaign, restore German cultural values, overturn the Treaty of Versailles, fight the fear danger of a communist revolt, bring the German people back to work, and restore Germany's quote-unquote rightful place as a global power. Hitler and other Nazi propagandists were very good at turning people's anger and fear against Jews, Marxists, and those the Nazis blamed for signing the armistice of November 1918, the Treaty of Versailles, and making Germany a parliamentary republic. Hitler and the Nazis often referred to them as November criminals. Every one of Hitler's and Nazi speakers' speeches was meticulously crafted to fit the specific audience. For instance, when speaking to businessmen, the Nazis downplayed anti-Semitism and instead emphasized anti-communism and the return of German colonies lost through the Treaty of Versailles. When speaking to soldiers, veterans, or other nationalist groups, Nazi propaganda centered on building up the military and getting back other territories that had been lost to the Treaty of Versailles. Farmers in the northern state of Schleswig-Holstein were promised by Nazi speakers that a Nazi administration would keep agricultural prices stable. Pensioners all around Germany were promised that their monthly checks would stay consistent in terms of both amount and purchase power. He had a broad base of support among Germans of various socioeconomic backgrounds. The name of the Nazi Party itself was deliberately all-inclusive: the National Socialist German Workers' Party. Every single member of the Nazi Party, starting with Hitler and going all the way down to the chairman of the tiniest city block, toiled at day and night to hammer their ideology into the heads of the German people. On September 14, 1930, the day of the election, the Nazis got 6,371,000 votes, which was over 18% of the total. This gave them the right to 107 seats in the German Reichstag. Hitler was able to pull off a spectacular win. The Nazi Party moved from being Germany's smallest political party to becoming its second largest in what seemed to be overnight. It elevated Hitler to a position of national and worldwide fame and piqued the interest of the foreign media. He was swamped with demands for an interview. Journalists from other countries were curious as to what he meant when he said Germany wasn't to blame for the First World War, and that the Treaty of Versailles should be torn up, and that war reparations should stop. Gone was the Charlie Chaplin image of Hitler as the laughable fanatic behind the beer hall putsch. The beer hall revolutionary had been replaced by the skilled manipulator of the masses. On October 13, 1930, wearing brown shirts, the elected Nazi MPs entered the Reichstag in unison and took their seats. When it came time to take roll, everyone shouted with a roar, "Present, Heil Hitler." They had no intention of collaborating with the Democratic administration, knowing that leaving things to worsen in Germany would increase Hitler's appeal to an increasingly depressed public. German citizen stormtroopers celebrated their political triumph by shattering the windows of Jewish businesses and department stores, a hint of what was to come. Now, the clock was ticking for the dying German democracy, and Hitler had time on his side.